The moment Adrian Hayes heard his 6-year-old daughter had collapsed at school, he knew two things with absolute certainty. His career was over, and nothing else mattered. What he didn't know was that the ice-cold billionaire CEO, who had just humiliated him in front of 30 executives, would be the one to drive him through a blizzard to save everything he had left. Sometimes the person who breaks you apart is the only one who knows how to put you back together. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Now let me tell you about 3 people who were drowning separately until one frozen Boston winter forced them to survive together. Adrian Hayes stood in the corner of the 42nd floor conference room, trying not to fall asleep on his feet. The coffee he'd downed an hour ago had worn off somewhere around slide 17 of the quarterly restructuring presentation, and now his eyelids felt like they were made of concrete. He'd been awake since 3 in the morning when Mia had another nightmare about her mom, and sleep after that had been impossible. The view outside the floor-to-ceiling windows should have been spectacular. Boston spreading out below in shades of gray and gold, the harbor glittering in the November morning light. But Adrian couldn't focus on anything except staying upright and praying this meeting would end before he embarrassed himself. At the front of the room, Selene Vaughn stood perfectly still beside a massive presentation screen, her posture so precise it looked rehearsed. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly rent. Her dark hair pulled back so severely it seemed designed to discourage conversation. Everything about her screamed control, from the way she held the presentation remote to the calculated pauses between her sentences. The third quarter analytics indicate a 7.2% decline in operational efficiency across mid-level divisions, she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made people sit straighter in their chairs. We're implementing immediate restructuring to correct these deficiencies. Adrian had heard about Selene Vaughn long before she'd acquired his company 6 months ago. Everyone on Wall Street knew the stories. She'd built Vaughn Capital from nothing at age 24, turning a small inheritance into a billion-dollar empire through sheer intelligence and ruthlessness. By 30, she controlled more assets than most people could comprehend. They called her the Ice Queen, though never to her face. She didn't fire people who disrespected her. She destroyed their entire careers so efficiently they didn't realize what had happened until it was over. Now she owned the financial analysis firm where Adrian had worked for 8 years, and this was the first time he'd been in the same room with her. He wished he'd gotten more sleep, or any sleep. Hayes! Adrian's head snapped up. Selene was looking directly at him, her expression unreadable. Yes? His voice came out rougher than intended. I asked for your assessment of the risk mitigation strategies outlined in Section 4. Every face in the room turned toward him. Adrian's mind went completely blank. Section 4. Risk mitigation. He'd read the briefing packet yesterday evening while Mia practiced writing her name at the kitchen table, but the details had evaporated somewhere between her bedtime story and the 3 a.m. nightmare. He cleared his throat. Could you clarify which specific strategies you're referencing? Nope. Wrong answer. He knew it immediately from the way Selene's eyes narrowed, just slightly. In the seats nearest him, 2 colleagues exchanged looks. The strategies detailed on pages 37 through 41, Selene said, her tone dropping several degrees. The ones specifically flagged for your division. Adrian felt sweat starting to form at his collar. He'd skimmed those pages. He definitely remembered seeing them. But standing here under Selene Vaughn's glacial stare, he couldn't recall a single concrete detail. The implementation timeline seemed aggressive, he said, grasping for something that sounded intelligent. Given current market volatility, we'd need to stress test the models against... I didn't ask about timeline concerns. I asked for your assessment. The room had gone completely silent. Even the usual ambient sounds, people shifting in chairs, fingers tapping on tablets, had stopped. Everyone was watching Adrian crash and burn in real time. His exhaustion was making everything worse. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. His brain felt stuffed with cotton. And Selene Vaughn stood there waiting, perfectly composed, probably thinking he was incompetent. Honestly? Adrian heard himself say. I think if we're restructuring based on 7% efficiency loss, We should probably restructure the restructuring committee first, since they're the ones who approved the policies that created the problem. The words were out before he could stop them. In the silence that followed, Adrian realized what he'd just done. He'd essentially insulted the entire executive leadership in front of the CEO, the billionaire CEO who had a reputation for ending careers before lunch. Someone near the back of the room made a strangled sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Celine's expression didn't change. She just looked at him for what felt like an eternity, her dark eyes revealing absolutely nothing. "Interesting perspective, Sean," she finally said, her voice soft and deadly. "We'll continue this conversation later, Mr. Hayes, alone." Adrian's stomach dropped. That was it. He was done. 8 years of solid performance reviews, erased in 30 seconds, because he couldn't keep his exhausted mouth shut. Selene turned back to the presentation screen. Moving on to Q4 projections. Adrian's phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. Selene was still talking, something about dividend restructuring, but he'd stopped processing the words. His brain was too busy calculating how quickly he could update his resume and how he'd explain to Mia that Daddy lost his job. The phone vibrated again. Then again. He pulled it out just enough to glance at the screen. 3 missed calls from Mia's school. His blood went cold. The phone started ringing again. The buzz loud enough that people nearby turned to look. Adrian saw the school's number and didn't think. He just answered. "Mr. Hayes?" The school nurse's voice sounded tight with controlled worry. "You need to come to the school right away. Mia collapsed during recess. We've called an ambulance." The room tilted. Adrian was moving before he fully registered what he was doing, shoving past chairs, heading for the door. Somewhere behind him, someone called his name, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He made it halfway across the conference room before Celine's voice cut through the chaos in his head. "Hayes, stop!" He turned, breathing hard, phone still pressed to his ear. Selene had lowered the presentation remote. Every executive in the room was staring at him. "I have to go," Adrian managed. "My daughter, there's an emergency." "Which hospital?" The question was so unexpected that Adrian just stared at her. Selene set down the remote with deliberate precision. "Which hospital is the ambulance taking her to?" I don't know yet. They just..." He looked at his phone, but the nurse had already hung up. He needed to call back. He needed to move. His hands were shaking. "Everyone out," Selene said, not raising her voice, but somehow making it heard by everyone in the room. "Meeting adjourned. Clear the building. Now." The executives moved like they'd been electrocuted, grabbing tablets and jackets and rushing for the exits. In less than 30 seconds, the conference room was empty except for Adrian and Selene. She walked toward him with that same measured precision she brought to everything. Up close, Adrian realized she was shorter than she seemed when commanding a room, maybe 5'6" without the heels. But her presence didn't diminish. "Call them back," she said. "Find out where they're taking her." Adrian's fingers felt numb as he pulled up the school's number. It rang 4 times before the nurse answered, sounding harried. "Mr. Hayes, the ambulance is leaving now. They're taking her to Boston Children's Hospital. You should meet them there." "What happened? Is she conscious? She's awake but disoriented. The paramedics think it might be related to her heart condition. Mr. Hayes, you really need to get there." "I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming." He hung up and was already moving toward the door when Selene spoke again. "My car is faster." Sir?" Adrian stopped, turned. Selene was pulling out her own phone, already typing something with quick, efficient movements. "You don't have to eat, but Boston Children's Hospital is 17 minutes from here in normal traffic. In current lunch hour conditions, you'll be looking at 40 minutes minimum if you take the T, 30 if you catch a cab immediately and the driver knows the shortcuts." She looked up from her phone. "My driver can get you there in 12 minutes, possibly 10 if I tell him it's an emergency. I don't understand why you... Do you want to argue about my motivations, or do you want to see your daughter?" "Okay." Adrian's throat closed. He managed a nod. Selene was already walking toward the elevator bank, her heels clicking against the polished floor with mechanical precision. Adrian followed, his brain still trying to process what was happening. The Ice Queen was helping him. Selene Vaughn, who'd been seconds away from firing him, was getting him to his daughter. They rode the elevator down in complete silence. Adrian's reflection in the polished doors looked wrecked, hair sticking up where he'd run his hands through it, tie crooked, face pale with panic. Next to him, Selene stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable as always. The elevator opened onto the building's private garage where a black Mercedes SUV was already waiting, engine running. A driver in a dark suit stood beside the rear door. "Boston Children's Hospital," Selene told him. "Fastest route possible." "Yes, ma'am." Adrian climbed into the back seat, Selene sliding in beside him. The door had barely closed before the SUV was moving, accelerating up the ramp with the kind of speed that suggested the driver was very good at his job. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Adrian stared at his phone, willing it to ring with an update, anything. His hands were still shaking. "How old is your daughter?" Adrian looked up. Selene was watching him with that same unreadable expression. 6. Her name is Mia. He heard himself talking, words spilling out to fill the terrible silence. She has a congenital heart defect, tetralogy of Fallot. They did surgery when she was 3, said she was doing well, but sometimes she gets weak or dizzy, or... His voice cracked. "She was fine this morning. She was fine. When did she eat last?" The question was so clinical, it took Adrian a second to process. "Breakfast, 7:30. She had cereal and orange juice. Any unusual symptoms before school?" "No, she was tired, but she's always tired lately. The doctor said that was normal, that her energy levels might fluctuate, but..." He stopped, something cold settling in his stomach. "She's been more tired than usual this past week. I thought she was just adjusting to the new school schedule after the time change." Selene pulled out her phone again, typing rapidly. "I'm sending a message to Dr. Yuki Reeves at Boston Children's. She's head of pediatric cardiology. I'll make sure she's available when we arrive." "You don't have to..." "You said that already." Selene didn't look up from her phone. "I'm doing it anyway." The SUV wove through traffic with alarming skill, the driver taking turns that made Adrian grab the door handle. Through the windshield, he could see the hospital complex rising in the distance. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before Adrian could stop it. Selene finally looked at him. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, something that might have been pain, or memory, or both. Then it was gone. "Because you're wasting time asking stupid questions instead of being grateful." They pulled up to the emergency entrance 8.5 minutes after leaving the office. Adrian had the door open before the SUV fully stopped, but Selene was right behind him, moving with that same efficient precision. The emergency room was chaos. Crying children, worried parents, nurses moving between curtained exam areas with practiced speed. Adrian pushed through to the reception desk, where a tired-looking woman in scrubs was managing 3 phone lines simultaneously. "My daughter, Mia Hayes. The ambulance just brought her in." "Mr. Hayes?" A different nurse appeared at his elbow, this one younger, with kind eyes. "They're taking Mia to exam room 6 for evaluation. You can come back, but we need you to fill out some paperwork first." "I'll handle the paperwork," Selene said from behind him. "He needs to be with his daughter." The nurse looked between them, clearly trying to figure out their relationship. "Are you family?" "Oi." "Just me, it's..." "I'm ensuring the family has what they need," Selene said in a tone that didn't invite argument. "Where is exam room 6? The nurse led them through a maze of curtained areas. Adrian could hear Mia before he saw her, that particular quality of crying that meant she was scared but trying to be brave. His heart lurched. She was sitting on an exam table in a hospital gown too big for her small frame, tear tracks on her cheeks, one of her braids coming loose. A paramedic was explaining something to a doctor, but the moment Mia saw Adrian, everything else ceased to exist. "Daddy!" He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her against his chest, feeling her small body shake with sobs. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo they'd used that morning, mixed with hospital antiseptic and fear. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here. You're okay. I got dizzy during recess and everything went dark and I was so scared. I know. But you're safe now." Over Mia's head, Adrian saw the doctor approaching, a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her badge read Dr. Sarah Chen, Emergency Medicine. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Dr. Chen. Mia's stable right now, but I want to run some tests given her cardiac history. Has she had any episodes like this before?" She gets tired easily, but she's never collapsed. Not since her surgery. Any recent illnesses? Changes in medication? No, nothing's changed. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on a tablet. I've ordered an ECG and some blood work. We'll also do an echo to check her heart function. Dr. Reeves from cardiology is on her way down. Dr. Reeves? Adrian looked confused. She was contacted about Mia's case, Dr. Chen said, glancing at something on her tablet. Apparently she's prioritizing this evaluation personally. Adrian turned and found Selene standing near the curtain, somehow managing to look completely in control despite being in an emergency room. She met his eyes, but said nothing. A different nurse entered, this one carrying a clipboard thick with forms. Mr. Hayes, I need to get some information and insurance details. Adrian's stomach dropped. His insurance was decent, but it didn't cover everything. And if Mia needed extended testing, or worse, another surgery, bill everything to Vaughn Capital, Selene said, still standing by the curtain. Account number 774218 Alpha. Put Mr. Hayes and his daughter down as corporate dependents under the executive health plan. The nurse blinked. I'll need to verify that with some... Call the number on the card, Selene said, handing over a black credit card that looked different from anything Adrian had ever seen. They'll confirm everything. You can't, Adrian started. We'll discuss it later, Selene said, in a tone that made it clear the discussion was already over. The nurse left with the card and clipboard. Dr. Chen smiled slightly. I'll give you some time with Mia before we start the test, she said, and disappeared through the curtain. Adrian looked at Mia, who had stopped crying but was still clinging to his shirt. Her eyes had found Selene studying her with the unfiltered curiosity only children could manage. Who's that? Mia whispered. That's Ms. Vaughn. She works with Daddy. She drove you here? Yes. Mia considered this, her small face serious. Then she looked at Selene directly. Thank you for bringing my daddy. Something shifted in Selene's expression. So subtle, Adrian almost missed it. For just a second, the perfect control cracked, and underneath was something raw and human and completely unexpected. You're welcome, Selene said quietly. A new doctor entered before anyone could say more. A short Asian woman with sharp eyes and an air of absolute competence. She looked at the tablet in her hand, then at Mia. Hello, Mia. I'm Dr. Reeves. I heard you had a scary morning. Mia nodded, still pressed against Adrian's chest. Dr. Reeves glanced at Selene, something passing between them. Recognition, maybe, or old familiarity. Then she focused on Adrian. Mr. Hayes, I understand Mia had corrective surgery for TOF 3 years ago. Has she been followed regularly by cardiology? Every 6 months. Her last checkup was in August. They said everything looked good. Any symptoms between appointments? Fatigue, like I told Dr. Chen, but they said that was normal. Dr. Reeves nodded, pulling a stethoscope from her pocket. I'm going to listen to your heart, Mia. It might feel cold, okay? She conducted the examination with gentle efficiency while Adrian held Mia's hand. Mia was being brave, but Adrian could feel her trembling. The ECG should be ready soon, Dr. Reeves said when she finished. I want to see those results before I make any recommendations. In the meantime, Mia needs rest and observation. How long will she need to stay? Depends on what the tests show. Could be a few hours, could be longer. The weight of those words settled over Adrian like a physical thing. Could be longer meant overnight. Overnight meant missing work tomorrow. Missing work meant explaining to his boss why, except his boss had just watched him walk out of a meeting, and now he was standing in a hospital room with the CEO who might fire him. I'll arrange a private room, Selene said, as if reading his thoughts. Somewhere quiet where Mia can rest properly. Ms. Vaughn. Selene, she interrupted, and before you argue, consider that arguing wastes time you could be spending with your daughter. She was right. Adrian hated that she was right. A nurse arrived with paperwork in a wheelchair. We're taking Mia up to cardiology for the echo, she explained. You can come with her, Mr. Hayes. Adrian helped Mia into the wheelchair, tucking a hospital blanket around her thin shoulders. She looked so small in the institutional furniture, her eyes too big in her pale face. Will you be here when I get back? Mia asked Selene. The question seemed to surprise Selene as much as it did Adrian. She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Adrian saw something he hadn't expected: uncertainty. "If you want me to be," Selene finally said. "I want you to be," Mia said with the absolute certainty of a 6-year-old who'd made up her mind. Selene nodded once. "Then I'll be here." They wheeled Mia away, Adrian walking beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder. As they turned the corner, he looked back and saw Selene still standing in the exam room, perfectly still, watching them go. The echo took 45 minutes. Mia was a champion through all of it, lying perfectly still while the technician moved the ultrasound wand across her chest. Images of her heart flickering across the monitor in black and white. Adrian held her hand and told her stories about her mother to keep her distracted. How they'd met at a bookstore, how Mom had always sung off-key in the car, how she'd loved thunderstorms. He didn't tell Mia the rest. How cancer had taken her mom so quickly, there'd barely been time to say goodbye. How the medical bills from that fight had crushed them. How Adrian still sometimes woke up, reaching for someone who wasn't there. When they finally returned to the emergency department, they found Selene exactly where they'd left her. She'd somehow procured coffee and was working on her phone, but she looked up immediately when they arrived. "They're moving you to room 412, she said. "4th floor. It's quiet up there." A different nurse, third one Adrian had seen, led them through a maze of corridors to an elevator that took them to the pediatric wing. Room 412 turned out to be twice the size of a normal hospital room, with a real bed instead of a gurney, a small couch by the window, and a television mounted on the wall. "This is the executive family suite," the nurse explained as she helped Mia into the bed. "Dr. Reeves ordered it specially." Adrian started to protest, but Selene's look stopped him. Once Mia was settled, Adrian sank onto the couch, exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was wearing off, leaving him hollow and shaky. Selene remained standing near the door, somehow still looking perfectly composed despite spending the last 2 hours in a hospital. Adrian didn't understand how she did it. The control, the precision, the absolute refusal to show weakness. "You should go," he said quietly, aware of Mia watching them both. "I'm sure you have other meetings, things to—" "Nothing that can't wait." "Selene, do you have anyone coming?" she interrupted. "Family? Friends?" The question hit harder than it should have. Adrian's parents had died in a car accident when he was 25. His wife had been an only child whose parents hadn't approved of the marriage and had cut her off. He had colleagues, but not friends. Not really. Not the kind you called in a crisis. "No," he admitted. Selene nodded like this confirmed something. She pulled out her phone again. "I'm ordering food. What is Mia like?" "You don't need to, Hayes? What does she like?" "Grilled cheese," Mia piped up from the bed, her voice small but determined. "And tomato soup. And chocolate milk if they have it." "Noted," Selene said, typing. "You?" Adrian realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. "Anything's fine." 20 minutes later, a delivery person arrived with bags from a restaurant Adrian recognized as expensive. There was grilled cheese and tomato soup for Mia, along with chocolate milk in a glass bottle. For Adrian, a sandwich that looked nothing like hospital cafeteria food. And for Selene, a salad she barely touched. They ate in strange silence, Mia picking at her food while watching something animated on the television. Adrian tried to focus on eating, but kept checking his phone for updates from the doctors. "Stop," Selene said quietly. "Stop what?" "Catastrophizing. You're running every worst-case scenario in your head. I can see it." Adrian set down his sandwich. "My 6-year-old daughter collapsed. I think I'm entitled to worst-case scenarios." You're entitled to whatever you're feeling, but you're not helping her by spiraling. And you're an expert on helping people? It came out harsher than he intended. Selene didn't flinch, but something shifted in her expression, a door closing. "No," she said evenly. "I'm not." Adrian immediately felt like garbage. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You're scared and exhausted and lashing out at whoever's in range. It's a normal human response." Selene stood, gathering her things with precise movements. "I should go. You need space." "Wait." Adrian stood too, suddenly not wanting her to leave, which made no sense. This was his boss, the Ice Queen, the woman who'd been about to fire him 6 hours ago. But she'd also driven him through Boston traffic at dangerous speeds and called in favors to get his daughter the best cardiologist in the city and sat in a hospital room for hours when she had absolutely no reason to be there. "Thank you," Adrian said, the words feeling inadequate. "For everything today. I don't know how to... I can't..." He stopped, overwhelmed. Selene looked at him for a long moment. Then, so quietly Adrian almost missed it, she said, "I had a younger brother, James. He died when he was 7. The statement hung in the air between them, heavy with everything she wasn't saying. "I'm sorry," Adrian whispered. "It was a long time ago." Selene's voice was carefully neutral, but I remember what it felt like, waiting in hospitals, hoping for good news. So when I see a child who needs help..." She stopped, something vulnerable flickering across her face before the control slammed back. "I should go." "Ms. Vaughn?" Mia's small voice came from the bed. "Can you stay for a little bit? I'm scared of hospitals." Selene froze. Adrian watched her face, saw the war happening behind her eyes, the instinct to maintain distance, to retreat behind her walls, fighting against something else, something that looked almost like longing. "Please?" Mia added, her eyes huge and pleading. Selene looked at Adrian, a question in her gaze. He nodded slightly. She set down her bag and returned to the chair by the window. Mia smiled, a real smile that transformed her worried face. "Do you want to watch cartoons with us?" "I don't watch cartoons." "Why not?" "Because I'm an adult with important responsibilities." "That sounds boring," Mia said with the brutal honesty of childhood. To Adrian's absolute shock, Selene laughed. It was brief and rusty, like something she didn't do often, but it was real. "It is boring," Selene admitted. They settled into an odd routine. Mia watched her show. Adrian dozed on the couch, too exhausted to fight it anymore. And Selene sat in the chair working on her phone, occasionally glancing up at the television with an expression that suggested she was trying very hard not to admit she was following the plot. Around 6 o'clock, Dr. Reeves finally returned. Her expression was serious, and Adrian's stomach dropped. "The echo showed some concerning changes," she said without preamble. "The surgical repair from 3 years ago is holding, but there's increased pressure in the right ventricle. Combined with the syncopal episode, I want to run more comprehensive tests." "What does that mean?" Adrian asked, his voice tight. "It means we keep Mia overnight for observation and do a cardiac MRI in the morning. Depending on those results, we'll determine next steps." "Is she going to need another surgery?" "I don't know yet. Let's take this one test at a time." Dr. Reeves explained the plan in more detail. Medications, monitoring, schedules. Adrian tried to absorb it all, but his brain felt sluggish. When the doctor left, Mia looked at Adrian with worried eyes. "Do I have to stay here?" "Just for tonight, baby, so the doctors can make sure you're okay." "Will you stay with me?" "Every second." Mia nodded, accepting this. Then she looked at Selene. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Oh." Selene hesitated. Adrian could see her weighing it, calculating the appropriate boundaries between employer and employee, between stranger and whatever this was becoming. "If your father doesn't mind," she finally said. "I don't mind," Adrian heard himself say. Something passed between them, an understanding maybe, or the beginning of one. Night fell over the city. Nurses came and went, checking Mia's vitals, adjusting IV lines. Adrian tried to sleep on the couch, but kept waking every time a machine beeped or footsteps passed in the hallway. Around midnight, he found himself standing at the window, looking out over Boston's lights. Behind him, Mia slept fitfully, her small form barely making a dent in the hospital bed. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Get some rest. She needs you functional tomorrow." Adrian stared at the message, then typed back, "How did you get my number?" The response came immediately. "I'm a billionaire CEO. I can get anyone's number." Despite everything, Adrian smiled. Then, "Thank you, for today." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "Stop thanking me and go to sleep, Hayes." Adrian looked at his daughter, at the monitors tracking her heartbeat, at the IV keeping her hydrated. He thought about tomorrow's tests and unknown results, and all the things that could still go wrong. But for the first time since his wife died, he didn't feel completely alone in the fear. Outside the window, snow had started to fall. The first storm of the season, covering Boston in white. The cardiac MRI was scheduled for 8 in the morning, which meant Mia couldn't eat or drink anything after midnight. She woke up at 6 complaining about being thirsty, and Adrian had to distract her with stories while his own stomach growled in sympathy. He'd skipped dinner the night before, too anxious to eat, and now regretted it. A nurse came in at 7 to prep Mia for the procedure, explaining in gentle tones what would happen. The MRI machine would be loud, she said, but Mia would have headphones with music. She'd need to stay very still, which might be hard, but it wouldn't hurt. Mia listened with wide eyes, her small hand gripping Adrian so tight his fingers went numb. "Can Daddy come with me?" she asked. "I'll be right there the whole time," Adrian promised, though he had no idea if that was true. Looking through the window, watching everything. "What about the nice lady?" Adrian blinked. "Ms. Vaughn? Is she coming back?" "I don't know, baby. She's very busy." His phone buzzed. Another text from that same unknown number. "Arriving in 20 minutes. Does Mia need anything?" Adrian stared at the message, something warm and confusing spreading through his chest. He typed back, "She's scared, that's all." The response was immediate. Understood. Exactly 19 minutes later, Selene Vaughn walked through the door carrying a small, yellow, stuffed bear wearing a doctor's coat. Mia's face lit up. "You came back!" I said I would." Selene approached the bed, her movements still precise but somehow softer than yesterday. She held out the bear. "This is Dr. Honeybee. He's been through 17 MRI scans and says they're not scary if you pretend you're an astronaut in a space pod." Mia took the bear reverently, hugging it against her chest. 17 scans? At least. He's very experienced. Yes. Is that true? Mia asked, with the skeptical wisdom of a child who'd learned that adults sometimes bent the truth to make things easier. Selene met her eyes seriously. "The part about the scans isn't true, but the part about pretending you're an astronaut actually does help. I've had 4 MRIs myself, and that's what I do." "You've had MRIs?" "Several. They're not fun, but they're not terrible either, just loud and boring." Adrian watched this exchange feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate universe. This was Selene Vaughn, the woman who'd built a billion-dollar empire on ruthless efficiency, sitting on a hospital bed talking to a 6-year-old about stuffed bears and space pods. A transport team arrived to take Mia down to radiology. Adrian walked beside the gurney, one hand on Mia's shoulder, while Selene followed a few steps behind. They took an elevator to the basement level, where the imaging department hummed with expensive machinery and hushed voices. The MRI tech was a cheerful woman in her 40s who showed Mia the machine and let her pick her music. She chose something from an animated movie Adrian had seen approximately 400 times. Then they explained that Adrian could watch from the control room, but couldn't go in the actual scanning room because of the massive magnets. "Dr. Honeybee can go with you, though," the tech said. "He's not magnetic." Mia clutched the bear and looked at Adrian with terrified eyes. He knelt beside the gurney. "You are the bravest person I know," he told her quietly. "Braver than astronauts, braver than superheroes. You can do this." "I'm scared, Daddy." "I know, but scared and brave can happen at the same time. That's what real courage is." Mia nodded, not looking convinced, but letting the tech wheel her into the scanning room. Adrian watched through the thick glass as they positioned her on the narrow table and slid her into the machine's tunnel. She looked impossibly small in there, just a tiny girl with a yellow bear, trying not to cry. The machine started with a sound like a jackhammer, and Adrian flinched despite knowing it was coming. "She'll be fine," Selene said quietly from beside him. "You can't know that." "No, but assuming the worst doesn't help anyone." Adrian turned to look at her. She was watching Mia through the glass, her expression unreadable as always. But there was something in her eyes that didn't match the carefully controlled exterior. "Why are you really here?" he asked. Selene was quiet for a long moment. On the monitors, he could see Mia lying perfectly still, the bear clutched against her chest. "I told you about my brother," Selene finally said. "James. He had leukemia. Diagnosed at 5, dead at 7. I was 12 when it happened. Old enough to understand, but not old enough to process it properly." Adrian waited, sensing there was more. "He spent a lot of time in hospitals. Our parents were both working constantly, trying to pay the medical bills, so I was the one who sat with him during treatments. Brought him toys, read him stories, held his hand when he was scared. She paused. I couldn't save him. All that time, all that trying, and I still couldn't save him. Selene? I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm explaining why I'm here. When I saw you yesterday, panicking about your daughter, I saw myself at 12 years old, terrified and helpless. And I thought maybe this time I could actually do something useful. The raw honesty of it stunned Adrian into silence. This wasn't the Ice Queen talking. This was someone who'd learned to bury pain so deep that it only surfaced in hospital waiting rooms. You did do something useful, he said quietly. You got me here in time. You called the best cardiologist in the city. You're doing more than you realize. Selene looked at him, and for just a second, her carefully constructed walls showed cracks. The MRI took 45 minutes. When they finally wheeled Mia back out, she was exhausted but proud. I did it, she announced. I was an astronaut, and Dr. Honeybee was my co-pilot, and we went to Mars. I'm so proud of you, Adrian said, kissing her forehead. Back in room 412, a nurse brought breakfast, oatmeal and toast and orange juice that Mia devoured like she'd been starving for days instead of hours. Adrian managed to eat something too, his appetite returning now that the scan was over. Selene sat in her usual chair by the window, working on her phone but present in a way that felt deliberate, like she'd carved out this space in her schedule and refused to let anything else intrude. Do you have to work? Mia asked between bites of toast. I am working. But you're here, I can do both. Mia considered this with the seriousness she brought to everything. My daddy works a lot too. He's always tired. Adrian felt his face heat. Mia. He falls asleep on the couch with his computer on his lap, Mia continued, oblivious to Adrian's discomfort. And sometimes he forgets to eat dinner because he's looking at spreadsheets. Selene's eyes found Adrian's, something that might have been amusement flickering there. Spreadsheets are very absorbing. That's what Daddy says. But I think he's just bad at taking care of himself. Mia, Adrian said firmly. Enough. But Selene was studying him now with an expression he couldn't quite read. When was the last time you ate a proper meal? I'm eating right now. Before today. Adrian tried to remember. Yesterday morning he'd grabbed coffee. The day before, had he eaten? Everything blurred together into an endless cycle of work and worry and taking care of Mia. That's what I thought, Selene said. She pulled out her phone again, typing with quick efficiency. I'm having lunch sent up. Real food, not hospital cafeteria sandwiches. You don't need to keep buying us food. Consider it a corporate expense. I don't work for you anymore, remember? I walked out of a meeting and basically told you the executive team was incompetent. Selene looked up from her phone. You're not fired, Hayes. I'm not? No. You were exhausted and your daughter was in an ambulance. I'd be more concerned if you'd stayed to finish the presentation. Adrian felt something loosen in his chest, tension he'd been carrying since yesterday that he hadn't fully acknowledged. So I still have a job. Or you still have a job. We'll discuss your commentary about the restructuring committee later. But yes. When I'm not in a pediatric cardiac ward? Exactly. Mia had been following this conversation with bright, curious eyes. Are you Daddy's boss? Yes, Selene said. Are you a good boss? That's a complicated question. Why? Selene seemed to consider how to answer. Because being a good boss sometimes means making decisions people don't like. Firing people who aren't doing their jobs properly. Changing policies that aren't working. Sometimes it means being the person everyone blames when things go wrong. But you help people too, Mia said. You helped us. That's different. Why? Oh, because you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. So you're a good boss who helps people when they need it, Mia concluded with absolute certainty. That's not complicated. Adrian watched Selene's face cycle through several emotions. Surprise, something that might have been gratitude, and underneath it all, that same raw vulnerability he'd glimpsed yesterday. I suppose that's one way to look at it, Selene said quietly. Dr. Reeves appeared around 11, her expression serious in a way that made Adrian's stomach clench. She pulled up a chair, tablet in hand, and Adrian braced himself. "The MRI results are concerning," she said without preamble. "The right ventricle is showing signs of significant strain. There's also evidence of pulmonary valve stenosis, narrowing that's restricting blood flow." Adrian's medical knowledge was limited, but he understood enough. "That's bad." "It's not good. The stenosis is likely why Mia's been experiencing increased fatigue and why she collapsed yesterday. Her heart is working harder than it should to pump blood through that narrowed valve." "What do we do?" Dr. Reeves looked at Mia, then back at Adrian. "We need to discuss surgical options. There's a procedure called a pulmonary valve replacement that would address the stenosis. It's not emergency surgery. We have some time, but it should happen within the next few months." The word surgery hit Adrian like a physical blow. He'd known this was possible, had been preparing himself for it all morning, but hearing it confirmed made it real. "How risky is it?" Selene asked from her chair by the window. Dr. Reeves glanced at her, then back to Adrian. "All surgery carries risk, especially cardiac surgery on a child, but Mia's had one successful repair already, which works in her favor. She's otherwise healthy. The procedure itself is well established. I'd put the success rate around 94% with an experienced surgical team." "And the cost?" Adrian asked, his voice rough, substantial. "I can have my office put together an estimate, but we're looking at 6 figures, possibly mid-6 figures depending on hospital stay and complications." Adrian felt the room tilt. 6 figures. He had maybe 5,000 in savings. His insurance had a high deductible and a lifetime maximum that he was probably close to hitting. He'd still been paying off bills from his wife's cancer treatment, from Mia's first surgery. "Insurance will cover a portion," Dr. Reeves continued, but Adrian barely heard her. His brain was already spiraling through impossible math, calculating how many years of debt this would mean, whether he could take out a second mortgage on a house he didn't own, what he could possibly sell that would make a dent. "I'll cover it," Selene said. Adrian's head snapped around. "What?" "The surgery. Hospital stay, recovery, whatever she needs, I'll cover all of it." "Absolutely not." "Hayes?" "No." Adrian stood, anger and shame and desperation colliding in his chest. "You've done enough, more than enough, but I'm not taking money from you for my daughter's surgery." "Why not?" "Because I don't want to owe you something I can never repay." The words came out louder than intended. Mia looked up from the stuffed bear, her eyes going wide. Dr. Reeves stood smoothly. "I'll give you some time to process this," she said. "We can discuss surgical scheduling later." She left, and the room fell into tense silence. Adrian realized his hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs, trying to regain control. "Mr. Hayes," Selene said, her voice carefully neutral. "Adrian, I understand your pride is hurt. This isn't about pride. Then what is it about?" But "It's about the fact that I'm supposed to be able to provide for my daughter. That's my job as her father. Not yours, not anyone else's. Mine." His voice cracked. "And I can't. I can barely keep us afloat with normal expenses. I'm already drowning in medical debt from her mother, from Mia's first surgery. And now this? I can't." He stopped, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. He would not break down. Not here. Not in front of his daughter and his boss and the entire pediatric cardiology department. Soft footsteps crossed the room. Then Mia's small hand found his. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered. "We'll figure it out." That almost broke him. His 6-year-old daughter comforting him because he couldn't hold it together. "Adrian?" Selene's voice was closer now. He lowered his hands and found her standing a few feet away, her expression still controlled but her eyes showing something different. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a solution to a problem that has a clear answer. The answer is for me to find a way to pay for it myself. And while you're figuring that out, what happens to Mia? She waits? Gets sicker? Risks another collapse that could be worse than yesterday?" Adrian flinched. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," Selene continued. "I'm saying it because someone has to be practical. You're a good father. You're doing everything right. But sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough. And that's not a moral failing. That's just reality." "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. You just don't want to." Those are the same thing. No, they're not. Celine's voice softened slightly. One is about ability. The other is about pride. And pride is a luxury your daughter can't afford right now. The brutal honesty of it cut through everything else. Adrian wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain all the complicated emotions churning in his chest. But underneath it all, he knew she was right. If you let me do this, Selene said quietly, it's not debt. It's not charity. It's one human being helping another human being because she can. Because she wishes someone had been in a position to help her family when her brother was sick. Because she's standing here watching a little girl who reminds her of someone she lost, and she refuses to lose again if she can prevent it. Itadete. Adrian looked at Mia, who was watching them both with worried eyes. Then at Selene, who stood there with her perfect composure cracking at the edges, showing the grief underneath. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Selene was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I stopped letting myself care about people years ago because it hurt too much when I lost them. But your daughter asked me to come back, and I came back. She thanked me for bringing her father, and it made me feel something I haven't felt in a very long time. So maybe I'm doing this as much for myself as for you." The raw honesty stunned him. This was so far from the Ice Queen reputation that Adrian wondered if anyone at Vaughn Capital had ever seen this side of her. "I'll pay you back," he said finally. "I don't know how yet, but I will. We'll discuss terms later. Right now I need you to focus on Mia, not financial calculations." Adrian nodded, not trusting his voice. Selene turned to leave, but Mia called out, "Miss Selene?" She stopped. "Yes? Are you leaving?" "Oh, I have meetings this afternoon that I can't postpone, but I'll come back tomorrow if you want." "I want," Mia said firmly. Then, with devastating sincerity, "You're nice, even though you pretend you're not." Selene's carefully controlled expression cracked completely. For just a second, her eyes went suspiciously bright before she blinked it away. "Get some rest," she told Mia. Then, to Adrian, "Call me if anything changes." She left before either of them could respond. Adrian sank onto the couch, emotionally exhausted. Mia climbed out of the hospital bed and curled up beside him, the yellow bear tucked under her chin. "I like her," Mia said. "I know you do, baby." "Do you like her?" Adrian thought about that. 24 hours ago, he'd been terrified of Selene Vaughn. Now she'd driven him through a blizzard, called in favors, bought them meals, and offered to pay for surgery that would save his daughter's life. "Yeah, he said quietly. "I think I do." The rest of the day passed in the strange suspended reality of hospital time. Nurses checked vitals. Doctors consulted about surgical scheduling. Adrian fielded concerned texts from a couple of colleagues who'd heard about the emergency. He didn't mention Selene's involvement. Didn't know how to explain it without it sounding wrong. That evening, Dr. Reeves returned with a surgical coordinator, a brisk woman named Patricia, who walked them through the entire procedure timeline. They were scheduling Mia's surgery for 3 weeks out, assuming no complications before then. In the meantime, Mia would need to avoid strenuous activity, come in for weekly monitoring, start on new medications to reduce the strain on her heart. Patricia handed Adrian a folder thick with information sheets and consent forms. The estimated cost breakdown was tucked in the back, and Adrian forced himself to look at it. $247,000. He felt sick. Patricia must have seen something in his face because she started talking about payment plans and financial assistance programs. Adrian nodded mechanically, but none of it would make a real difference. This was the kind of debt that crushed people. After she left, Adrian sat in the chair by Mia's bed and stared at that number until the digits stopped making sense. His phone buzzed. "Selene, Patricia called me with the surgery date. I've arranged everything with the hospital billing department. You won't receive any invoices." Adrian typed back, "I can't let you do this." The response came immediately. "You already did. It's done." He stared at his phone, emotions he couldn't name warring in his chest. Pride and gratitude and shame and relief all tangled together until he couldn't separate them. Another text arrived. "Stop overthinking. Your daughter needs you focused, not spiraling about money. We'll figure out the rest later." Then, "Get some sleep, Hayes. That's an order from your boss." Despite everything, Adrian smiled. They discharged Mia the next morning with instructions to keep her quiet and bring her back if anything changed. Adrian packed up their things while Mia sat in the wheelchair required by hospital policy, still clutching Dr. Honeybee. A nurse Adrian hadn't seen before wheeled them down to the main entrance, where Adrian expected to call a ride share. Instead, he found Celine's black Mercedes already waiting. Selene stood beside it, dressed in another impeccable suit, her expression unreadable. "Your apartment is in Dorchester, correct?" she said by way of greeting. "How do you know where I live?" "HR records. Get in." Adrian helped Mia into the back seat, then climbed in beside her. Selene took the front passenger seat, giving the driver Adrian's address with the same precision she brought to everything. The drive took 20 minutes through late morning traffic. Mia dozed against Adrian's shoulder, exhausted from 2 nights in the hospital. Adrian watched Boston slide past the windows and tried not to think about the fact that his boss was personally ensuring he got home safely. His apartment building was nothing special, a converted triple-decker in a neighborhood that was slowly gentrifying but hadn't quite made it yet. Adrian directed the driver to park in front, then carefully gathered a sleeping Mia in his arms. "I'll get the bags," Selene said, already reaching for the overnight bag Adrian had hastily packed 2 days ago. "You don't have to." "Hayes, stop arguing with me about everything." She followed him up 2 flights of stairs to his 3rd-floor apartment. Adrian fumbled with his keys one-handed, finally got the door open, and carried Mia straight to her bedroom. The apartment was exactly as he'd left it Wednesday morning. Breakfast dishes still in the sink, his laptop open on the coffee table, Mia's homework scattered across the kitchen counter. He'd been meaning to clean for weeks. Now, Selene Vaughn was standing in his tiny living room, looking at the peeling paint and secondhand furniture and the general chaos of a single father barely holding it together. He set Mia down on her bed, pulled off her shoes, tucked her under the covers. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over, already deep asleep. When Adrian emerged from the bedroom, he found Selene examining his bookshelf. She'd set down the overnight bag and was studying his collection with the same focused attention she probably brought to financial reports. "A lot of historical fiction," she observed. "My wife loved it. I kept her books after she died." Selene nodded, not offering meaningless condolences, just accepting the information. Adrian moved to the kitchen, suddenly aware of how small and shabby everything looked through her eyes. The apartment was clean enough, but it was obvious money was tight. No dishwasher, an ancient refrigerator that hummed too loud, furniture that was functional but worn. "Coffee?" he offered, needing something to do with his hands. "If you're making it anyway." He set up his battered coffee maker, grateful for the familiar routine. Selene wandered the small space, not touching anything, just observing. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt oddly natural. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 4 years. We moved in after Mia's first surgery. The previous place didn't have an elevator, and carrying her up 3 flights every day was getting dangerous. No family to help? Both my parents died in a car accident when I was 25. My wife's parents cut her off when she married me. I wasn't good enough for their daughter, apparently. They didn't even come to her funeral. Selene was quiet. The coffee maker gurgled and dripped. "What about you?" Adrian asked. "Family? My parents are alive. They live in Connecticut. We speak approximately twice a year, usually when they need something." Her voice was carefully neutral. "After James died, they threw themselves into work. Grief made them strangers. I learned early that emotional vulnerability was weakness, so I became very good at not being vulnerable." The coffee finished brewing. Adrian poured 2 mugs, added cream to his, left Selene's black because he realized he didn't know how she took it. She accepted the mug and took a sip. "Black is fine." They stood in his tiny kitchen drinking coffee, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people who'd been through something intense together, trying to figure out what happened next. "The executive team is going to talk," Selene said finally. Adrian looked up. "About what?" "About me leaving a restructuring meeting to help an employee. About me spending 2 days in a hospital. About me paying for your daughter's surgery." "Choats. You don't have to pay." "We've already had this argument. I won." Selene set down her mug. "But the optics are complicated. People will assume things. They'll say I'm showing favoritism. They'll question my judgment." "I'm sorry. I don't care what they think. I'm telling you because you should be prepared. There will be rumors. Some people will assume our relationship is more than professional." Adrian felt his face heat. "There's no relationship. I mean, there is, but not, I didn't mean, I know what you meant. For the first time since he'd met her, Selene smiled. It was small and brief, but genuine. I'm not concerned about the rumors. I've been dealing with worse for years. But you might face questions. Colleagues who think you're getting special treatment. Are they wrong? Technically, no. You are getting special treatment, but not for the reasons they'll assume. Adrian thought about that. About how this would look from the outside. About the whispers that would start the moment he walked back into the office. Do you want me to resign? He asked quietly. Selene's eyes snapped to his. What? No. Why would you even? Because it would be easier for you. If I'm not there, the rumors stop. Hayes, Adrian, listen to me very carefully. She set down her coffee mug with deliberate precision. You are a talented analyst who's been consistently excellent at your job for 8 years. You identified inefficiencies in our restructuring plan that I'd already noticed but couldn't say publicly because it would undermine the executive team. You're exactly the kind of employee I want to keep, not lose. Even if keeping me causes problems? I've built a company worth billions. I think I can handle some gossip. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it by the door. Take the rest of the week off. Be with Mia. Come back Monday if you're ready. We'll deal with everything else as it comes. She was leaving. Adrian felt something like panic flutter in his chest, which made no sense. This woman was his boss. She'd done more than enough. There was no reason for her to stay. Selene, he said, stopping her at the door. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something complicated pass across her face. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. This is my personal cell number, she said, handing it to him. Not the office line. If Mia needs anything, or if something changes with the surgery, call me. Anytime. Adrian took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. You've already given me too much. Then one more thing won't matter. She opened the door, then paused. Mia was right, you know, about you being bad at taking care of yourself. Make sure you actually eat this week, not just coffee and whatever's in your freezer. Yes, boss? The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the stairs. Adrian stood in his empty apartment holding a business card with Selene Vaughn's personal phone number on it, trying to process the last 48 hours. 2 days ago, she'd been the Ice Queen, a distant figure of power and control. Now she was someone who brought stuffed bears to scared children and offered to pay for surgery and gave out her personal number. He didn't understand what was happening, but standing there in his tiny kitchen with weak November sunlight filtering through the windows, Adrian realized he wanted to understand. Wanted to figure out what was beneath all those carefully constructed walls. Wanted to know who Selene Vaughn actually was when she wasn't being a billionaire CEO. His phone buzzed. A text from that same number now saved in his contacts. I meant what I said about eating. I'm having groceries delivered in an hour. Don't argue. Adrian looked at his mostly empty refrigerator and the sad collection of freezer meals he'd been surviving on. He should argue. Should insist he could handle this himself. Instead, he typed back, "Thank you." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, "You're welcome." Adrian saved the number under her name and allowed himself to smile. The groceries arrived exactly when Selene said they would, delivered by a service Adrian had never used because it cost 3 times what the regular supermarket charged. 2 bags full of actual food, fresh vegetables, good bread, chicken that wasn't frozen, pasta, sauce, things Mia actually liked to eat. There was even a box of the specific cereal Mia preferred, the expensive kind Adrian usually skipped because the store brand was cheaper. He stared at the groceries spread across his counter and felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Gratitude mixed with shame, mixed with something else he couldn't name. Selene Vaughn had been in his apartment for maybe 20 minutes, and somehow she'd noticed what he didn't have. Mia wandered out of her bedroom around noon, still groggy from sleep, doctor. Honeybee dragging from one hand. Is Miss Selene still here? She asked, looking around the empty apartment with obvious disappointment. She had to go back to work, baby, but she sent us food. Mia perked up at that, climbing onto a kitchen chair to inspect the hall. Can we make the pasta, the kind with the twisty noodles? Yeah, we can make that. They spent the afternoon doing nothing in particular. Mia colored at the kitchen table while Adrian pretended to work on his laptop, but mostly just stared at spreadsheets without processing them. His brain kept replaying the last 2 days on loop. The hospital, the tests, Celine's hands carefully not shaking as she held out that stuffed bear, the look on her face when Mia called her nice. Around 3, his phone rang. Unknown number, but local area code. Adrian answered cautiously. "Mr. Hayes, this is Jennifer from Vaughn Capital HR. I'm calling to confirm your leave status." Adrian's stomach clenched. "My leave status?" "Vaughn submitted paperwork this morning putting you on medical family leave for the next 3 weeks. I just need to verify a few details for our records." 3 weeks. The exact amount of time until Mia's surgery. "I didn't request family leave," Adrian said carefully. "Ms. Vaughn indicated it was urgent given your daughter's medical situation. The leave is fully paid and won't count against your PTO balance." Jennifer's voice was professionally neutral, giving nothing away. "Is there a problem with the dates?" Adrian pressed his fingers against his forehead. 3 weeks of paid leave he hadn't asked for. More special treatment that would look exactly as suspicious as Selene had warned him about. "No," he heard himself say. "The dates are fine." "Excellent. I've emailed you the paperwork. Just sign and return by end of business Friday. Hope your daughter feels better soon." She hung up before Adrian could respond. He sat there staring at his phone, trying to decide if he should be grateful or angry. Selene had just made a decision about his job without consulting him, had used her position to give him benefits he hadn't earned, and she'd done it knowing exactly how it would look. His phone buzzed. Text from Selene. "Before you get upset about the leave, consider that you need to be available for Mia's weekly cardiology appointments, and you are going to burn through all your PTO anyway. This is more efficient." Adrian typed back, "You could have asked me first." The response was immediate. "Would you have said yes?" He stared at that for a long moment, then deleted 3 different responses before finally sending, "Probably not." "Exactly. Stop overthinking my decisions and focus on your daughter." Despite his complicated feelings, Adrian smiled. The first week passed in a strange, suspended reality. Mia was supposed to rest, which meant a lot of coloring books and movies and quiet games that didn't require running around. Adrian tried to keep her entertained while also catching up on laundry and cleaning and all the household tasks he'd been putting off for months. Selene texted every evening around 6. Short, practical messages that felt like check-ins disguised as casual conversation. "How is Mia feeling today? Did she eat breakfast? Any dizziness or unusual symptoms?" Adrian answered honestly, and sometimes they'd exchange a few more messages about nothing in particular. She never called, never pushed for more than he offered, just maintained a steady presence that was becoming oddly familiar. On Wednesday, Mia had her first follow-up appointment with Dr. Reeves. Adrian took a ride share to the hospital, Mia clutching Dr. Honeybee the entire way. The checkup was routine. Listen to her heart, check her vitals, ask about symptoms. Everything looked stable. "She's doing well," Dr. Reeves said, making notes on her tablet. "Keep her activity restricted until after the surgery, but otherwise just maintain the current medication schedule." "And the surgery itself?" Adrian asked. "Everything's still on track for 3 weeks out?" "Absolutely. We've got the surgical team confirmed, the OR scheduled. Barring any complications, we'll proceed as planned on December 4th. December 4th. 3 weeks and 2 days away. Adrian felt his stomach tighten. That evening, he texted Selene. "Cardiology appointment went well. Everything stable." Her response came 15 minutes later. "Good. Has Mia been sleeping?" Adrian looked at his daughter, who was curled up on the couch watching something animated, her eyes already drooping despite it being only 7:30. Better than usual, actually. The reduced activity is helping. "Selene, and you?" The question surprised him. Adrian stared at it, trying to decide how to answer. The truth was he'd been sleeping terribly, waking up every few hours in a panic, checking to make sure Mia was still breathing. But admitting that felt like admitting weakness. "I'm fine," he finally typed. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Then, "You're a terrible liar, Hayes." Adrian found himself smiling despite the exhaustion. The rumors started exactly when Selene had predicted they would. Friday afternoon, Adrian got a text from Marcus, a colleague he'd worked with for 6 years. "Hey man, heard about Mia. Hope she's doing okay. Also heard some interesting stuff about you and Vaughn. Want to grab a beer and talk?" Adrian stared at the message, his jaw tight. It hadn't even been a week and people were already speculating. He typed back, "Mia's stable. Not much to talk about otherwise." Marcus responded immediately. "Come on. You walk out of a meeting, Vaughn follows you. Suddenly you're on 3 weeks paid leave. Nobody else knew was available? People are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind you probably don't want floating around the office. Just saying, might be worth getting ahead of it." Adrian set down his phone, anger simmering in his chest. He'd done nothing wrong. His daughter had been in an ambulance, but apparently that didn't matter when there was gossip to spread. He texted Selene. "The rumors are starting." Her response was almost instant. "Ignore them. Easy for you to say. You're the CEO. I'm the guy everyone thinks is sleeping with the boss for special treatment." Long pause. Then, "Are you asking me to address it officially?" Adrian thought about that. Official acknowledgement might make it worse, might confirm that there was something to address. "No," he typed. "Just venting. Understood. For what it's worth, anyone who questions your professional competence will be quickly corrected." Adrian could imagine exactly how that conversation would go. Selene Vaughn in full Ice Queen mode, destroying someone's argument with surgical precision. "Thanks," he sent back. Then, after a pause, "How are you handling it?" The question felt more personal than he'd intended. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I've handled worse. This is just noise." But was it just noise? Adrian thought about what she'd said in his apartment, how the executive team would talk, how people would assume things. She was managing a billion-dollar company while dealing with gossip about her personal life because she'd chosen to help him. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this because of me." Selene's response came faster this time. "Hayes, stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. I made my choices with full awareness of the consequences. I don't regret them." Adrian read that message 3 times, trying to parse what she wasn't saying. The second week brought more routine, cardiology appointments every Monday and Thursday, medication twice a day. Quiet activities that kept Mia entertained without overtaxing her heart. Adrian fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, except for the constant undercurrent of anxiety about the surgery looming ahead. Selene's evening texts continued, evolving gradually from pure medical check-ins to something that felt more like actual conversation. She started asking about Mia's day, not just her symptoms. Started mentioning things happening at the office in a way that suggested she wanted Adrian's opinion. One evening, she texted, "The restructuring committee approved a policy today that directly contradicts the efficiency analysis you flagged in that meeting. Thought you'd find that ironic." Adrian smiled. "Told you the committee was the problem." 3 dots. Then, "Your commentary during that meeting was actually quite insightful. You should have more confidence in your instincts. Hard to have confidence when your instincts involve insulting the executive leadership in front of 30 people." Selene, "Sometimes the truth is more important than politeness." He thought about that for a while before responding. "Is that how you built your company? By being brutally honest?" "Partly. Also by being smarter than everyone else in the room and refusing to apologize for it." Adrian laughed out loud, startling Mia from her coloring book. "What's funny, Daddy?" "Just something from work, baby." "Is it Ms. Selene? You smile when you talk to her." Adrian felt his face heat. "I smile at lots of things. Not like that." Mia went back to coloring with the absolute certainty of a child who'd noticed something adults tried to hide. That night, Adrian lay awake thinking about Selene's texts, about the easy back and forth that had developed between them, about how he found himself looking forward to that 6 o'clock message every evening. This wasn't just professional courtesy anymore. This was something else. Something that probably should worry him more than it did. On Saturday of the second week, Selene showed up at his apartment unannounced. Adrian answered the door in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, unshowered and definitely not prepared for company. Selene stood in the hallway dressed casually, jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Adrian's monthly rent, but still more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "I brought lunch," she said, holding up bags from a restaurant Adrian recognized but had never been able to afford. "I hope you haven't eaten yet." No, we haven't." Adrian stepped back, acutely aware of the toys scattered across his living room and the general chaos of weekend single parenting. Come in. Mia appeared from her bedroom, eyes lighting up when she saw who was at the door. Miss Selene? You came to visit. I did. I brought sandwiches and soup and something chocolate for dessert. Bichosh sitter skån. Mia practically vibrated with excitement. They set up lunch at Adrian's small kitchen table. Selene unpacking containers with the same precision she probably brought to corporate negotiations. The food smelled incredible, real restaurant food, not the kind that came in microwave packaging. This is too much, Adrian said, surveying the spread. It's lunch. Everyone eats lunch. You know what I mean. Selene looked at him directly. If I want to bring lunch to people I care about, I'll bring lunch. You don't get to decide what's too much for me to give. People I care about, the words hung in the air between them while Mia obliviously reached for a sandwich. They ate together, Mia chattering about the movie she'd watched that morning and the picture she'd drawn of Dr. Honeybee as an astronaut. Selene listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed she was actually interested in a 6-year-old's rambling stories. Adrian watched this interaction, feeling something shift in his chest. This wasn't the Ice Queen. This wasn't even the controlled CEO who'd sat in a hospital room maintaining perfect composure. This was someone softer, more real, showing Mia a gentleness that felt almost protective. After lunch, Mia wanted to show Selene her room. Adrian started to protest. The room was a mess. Toys everywhere, nothing organized. But Selene was already following Mia down the short hallway. He cleaned up the lunch containers and tried not to eavesdrop, but his apartment was small enough that he could hear their conversation anyway. This is my bed, Mia was explaining. And this is my bookshelf. Daddy reads me stories every night. And this is the picture of my mommy. Silence. Then Selene's voice, quieter than usual. She's beautiful. You look like her. Everyone says that. I don't remember her very well anymore. She died when I was 4, but Daddy tells me stories about her so I won't forget. That's important, keeping memories alive. Did you forget your brother, since he died a long time ago? Adrian froze, wondering if Mia had just crossed a line. But Selene's response when it came was gentle. No, I remember him. He liked dinosaurs and terrible jokes and building things with blocks. He was brave, like you. Were you sad when he died? Very sad, for a long time. Are you still sad? Another pause. Sometimes, but talking about him helps. Remembering the good parts instead of just the sad ending. Adrian found himself standing in the kitchen with a container of soup halfway to the refrigerator, his throat tight. He'd known Selene had lost her brother, but hearing her talk to Mia about it with such raw honesty made it real in a way the clinical explanation hadn't. Mia and Selene emerged a few minutes later, Mia carrying a picture she'd drawn of 3 stick figures holding hands. This is me and Daddy and you, Mia explained, showing Selene the drawing, because you're part of our family now. Selene took the picture like it was something precious and fragile. Can I keep this? Yes. You can put it in your office so you remember us when you're working. I don't need a picture to remember you, but I'd like to have it anyway. Mia beamed. Selene stayed for another hour, sitting on Adrian's worn couch, while Mia showed her various games and books and explained in great detail the plot of at least 3 different movies. Adrian made coffee and mostly watched, fascinated by this version of Selene Vaughn that nobody at Vaughn Capital would recognize. When she finally stood to leave, Mia hugged her without hesitation. Selene went very still for a moment, like she'd forgotten how to process physical affection, then carefully hugged back. Thank you for lunch, Mia said. Can you come back next week? If your father says it's okay. They both looked at Adrian. He should probably say no, should maintain some kind of professional boundary, should not let his daughter get attached to his boss who was already doing far too much for them. Of course it's okay, he heard himself say instead. Selene smiled, and it transformed her entire face. Adrian walked her to the door while Mia went back to her toys. In the hallway, Selene paused. She's wonderful, Selene said quietly. She is. Takes after her mother that way. I think she takes after you more than you realize. Adrian didn't know what to say to that. They stood in the hallway, the building quiet around them, something unspoken hanging in the air. "Why are you really doing this?" Adrian asked. "All of it. The surgery, the groceries, coming here for lunch. You could write a check and walk away. You don't owe us anything." Selene was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost vulnerable. "When James was sick, I used to imagine what it would be like if someone swooped in and fixed everything, just showed up with money and connections and made all the scary parts disappear." She looked down at the drawing Mia had given her, still clutched in her hand. "Nobody did that for us. My parents were too proud to ask for help, too busy trying to maintain appearances. So we suffered quietly until there was nothing left to suffer for." "Selene, I'm not trying to fix you, Adrian. You're not broken. But Mia is 6 years old and scared, and she reminds me so much of James that sometimes I can barely breathe. And if I can make this easier for her, for both of you, then maybe—" She stopped, her careful control cracking. "Maybe it means James's death wasn't completely pointless. Maybe all the pain I went through taught me something worth using to help someone else." The raw honesty of it hit Adrian like a physical blow. This wasn't about charity or pity or even attraction. This was about a 12-year-old girl who'd watched her brother die and never forgiven herself for being unable to save him. "You're helping more than you know," Adrian said quietly. "Not just with money. With everything else. Being here, talking to her, making her feel less alone." "Making both of you feel less alone," Selene corrected. "I see how you look sometimes, like you're drowning and pretending everything's fine. I know that look. I've worn it for years." Adrian swallowed hard. "Is that what tonight was about? You recognizing a fellow drowning person?" "Maybe partly. Or maybe I just wanted to have lunch with people who don't treat me like a bank account or a business opportunity. Maybe I'm tired of being alone in my perfect empty penthouse, pretending I chose this life, instead of having it chosen for me by grief." They were standing too close now, the hallway suddenly feeling smaller. Adrian could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that her perfect makeup usually hid. "You're not alone anymore," he said, "if you don't want to be." Selene looked at him, and for just a moment, every wall she'd ever built came crashing down. He saw the lonely child who'd lost her brother, the teenager who'd learned to bury emotions, the woman who'd built an empire to prove she didn't need anyone, all while desperately wanting someone to see through the armor. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Yeah," Adrian agreed, also not moving. They stood there in the hallway, close enough to touch, both of them aware that something had shifted between them, and neither quite ready to name it. Finally, Selene stepped back. "I'll see you next Saturday, if the offer still stands." "It stands." She nodded once, then headed for the stairs. Adrian watched her go, his heart doing complicated things in his chest that he really didn't want to examine too closely. When he went back inside, Mia was waiting with knowing eyes. "You like her," she said, not a question. "She's nice," Adrian said, dodging. "No, Daddy, you like her like Mommy." Adrian's breath caught. "Maybe it's not. It's more complicated than that." "Why?" "Because she's my boss, and we barely know each other. And she's doing all of this because she's being kind, not because she feels anything." Mia gave him a look that suggested she thought he was being deliberately dense. "She came to our house with lunch and spent 2 hours playing with me, and she looks at you the same way you look at her when you think nobody's watching." "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You just don't notice because you're tired all the time." Adrian pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her hair. "What am I going to do with you?" "Ilam. You're going to let Ms. Selene come back next week, and you're going to stop pretending you don't like her. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. You just make it complicated because you're a grown-up." Out of the mouths of babes, Adrian thought. That night, after Mia was asleep, Adrian sat on his couch with a beer. He wasn't really drinking and thought about everything that had happened in the last 2 weeks. Thought about Selene Vaughn showing up at his apartment with lunch and sitting on his worn furniture and talking to his daughter about dead siblings with painful honesty. Thought about the way she'd looked at him in the hallway, like she was just as confused and off balance as he was. His phone buzzed. Text from Selene. Thank you for letting me spend time with Mia today. I haven't enjoyed an afternoon that much in years. Adrian stared at the message, his heart doing that complicated thing again. Thank you for coming, he typed back. She loved having you there. We both did. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'll see you Saturday. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement, a commitment. Adrian set down his phone and stared at the ceiling of his small apartment, trying to figure out when his life had gotten so complicated. 2 weeks ago, Selene Vaughn had been a distant figure of power he'd been terrified of. Now, she was someone who brought lunch and kept drawings from his daughter and looked at him in hallways like maybe she was just as scared of what was happening between them as he was. The surgery was 13 days away. After that, everything would change again. Mia would recover. Adrian would go back to work. The forced proximity of medical crisis would end, and they'd all return to their normal lives. Except Adrian was starting to suspect that normal wasn't possible anymore. Not when Selene Vaughn had cracked open every wall she'd ever built and shown him the person underneath. Not when he found himself looking forward to her 6 o'clock texts more than anything else in his day. Not when his 6-year-old daughter had declared Selene part of their family with the absolute certainty of childhood truth. Something had started in that hospital room 2 weeks ago. Something that had nothing to do with money or obligation or professional courtesy. Something that felt dangerously close to mattering. Adrian finished his beer and headed to bed, knowing sleep would be elusive but needing to try anyway. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant another quiet day with Mia. Then Monday brought another cardiology appointment. Then the countdown continued toward December 4th and everything that came after. But for now, for tonight, Adrian let himself think about Selene's smile when Mia hugged her. Let himself remember the vulnerable look in her eyes in the hallway. Let himself imagine what it might mean if this wasn't just kindness. Outside his window, Boston hummed with its usual weekend chaos. But inside his small apartment, everything felt suspended in possibility. 13 days until surgery. 13 days to figure out what was happening between him and Selene Vaughn. 13 days until everything changed. Spring came to Boston the way it always did, reluctantly, fighting winter for every degree of warmth. By early April, the snow had finally melted completely, leaving behind streets lined with salt stains and the first brave crocuses pushing through half-frozen ground. Adrian stood at his apartment window watching the city wake up, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, and thought about how different everything looked now compared to 5 months ago. Mia was still asleep, her bedroom door cracked open the way she liked it. The surgery had been 3 months ago, and the recovery had been brutal in ways Adrian hadn't fully prepared for. 2 weeks in the hospital, another month of restricted activity, endless follow-up appointments and medications and moments of pure terror when Mia coughed wrong or complained about chest pain that turned out to be nothing. But she'd made it through. Dr. Reeves had cleared her for normal activity 2 weeks ago, and yesterday Mia had run across the playground at school for the first time since November. Actually ran, at full speed, laughing with the kind of pure joy that made Adrian's throat tight. His phone buzzed on the counter. Text from Selene. Are you awake? It was barely 7 on a Saturday morning. Adrian smiled and typed back. Unfortunately. Mia's still sleeping, though. 3 dots appeared immediately. I'm downstairs. Can I come up? Adrian looked down at his sweatpants and the fact that he definitely hadn't brushed his teeth yet. Then he thought about Selene sitting in her car in front of his building at 7 in the morning and decided teeth could wait. Come up, he sent back. 2 minutes later, there was a soft knock at his door. Adrian opened it to find Selene standing there in running clothes. Leggings and a jacket he'd never seen her wear before. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked more nervous than he'd ever seen her. Hi, she said. Are you okay? I need to talk to you about something, and if I wait until a reasonable hour, I'm going to lose my nerve. Adrian's stomach clenched. That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know. Selene stepped inside, and Adrian noticed she was carrying a folder. Is Mia really still asleep? Dead to the world. She stayed up too late watching movies. Good, because this conversation needs to happen without a 6-year-old audience. Now Adrian was genuinely worried. He followed Selene to the kitchen, where she set down the folder with the kind of precision that meant she'd been rehearsing this moment. I'm leaving Vaughn Capital, she said. Adrian stared at her. What? Not immediately. The transition will take about 6 months, but I've started the process of stepping down as CEO. I don't understand. Why would you? That company is your entire life. Selene pulled out one of his kitchen chairs and sat down like her legs couldn't quite hold her anymore. That's the problem. It became my entire life because I used it to avoid having a life. After James died, I threw myself into building something I could control. Every metric, every decision, every risk calculated down to the decimal point. I thought if I could just be successful enough, powerful enough, wealthy enough, then I'd stop feeling empty. She looked up at him, and Adrian saw something raw in her expression. But I'm 40 years old in a few months, Adrian. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I have a company that runs itself at this point, and until 5 months ago, I had absolutely nothing that actually mattered. No family. No real friends. No one who'd notice if I disappeared tomorrow, except my accountant and my board of directors. Selene, let me finish, please. She took a breath. Then Mia collapsed, and you ran out of that meeting, and something in me just broke open. I saw this terrified father who was trying so hard to hold everything together while falling apart. I saw a little girl who needed help that her father couldn't afford. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt like maybe I could do something that actually mattered more than quarterly profits. Adrian sank into the chair across from her, his coffee completely forgotten. These last few months, Selene continued, coming here on Saturdays, having dinner with you and Mia, being part of something real instead of just transactions and negotiations, it's been the happiest I've been since James died. And I realized I don't want to go back to my empty penthouse and my 80-hour work weeks and pretending that being rich and powerful is the same thing as being whole. She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. So I'm stepping down, transitioning to chairman of the board, which means oversight without daily operations. I'm keeping my shares and my voting power, but someone else will run the company. Someone who actually wants to spend their life in conference rooms. Adrian looked at the documents, official letterhead, legal language, her signature already on half of them. What are you going to do instead? Shasiki ishi itiya. That's the part where I need to talk to you. Selene pulled out another paper, this one different from the others. I'm starting a foundation. Medical assistance for families who can't afford treatment for their children. James Hayes Foundation, named after my brother and your daughter. Adrian's breath caught. You're naming it after Mia. What? She gave me my life back, Adrian. The least I can do is make sure other children don't suffer because their parents can't afford to save them. Selene slid the paper across to him. But here's the thing. I don't know how to run a foundation. I know business and finance and how to terrify people in boardrooms. I don't know how to actually help families who are scared and desperate and need someone to tell them it's going to be okay. She met his eyes directly. But you do. You've lived it. You know what it feels like to love someone so much that you destroy yourself to save them. And you know what it's like when someone shows up offering help. You're too proud to accept. So I want you to run it with me. Adrian couldn't process what he was hearing. Run a foundation? Co-director. Equal partnership. You'd handle family services, navigate them through the medical system, make sure they get what they need. I'd handle fundraising and operations and making sure we have enough money to actually make a difference. She paused. The salary would be less than what you make now at Vaughn Capital, but it would be enough to live on, and the work would matter. I don't have experience running a nonprofit. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together. That's kind of the point. Adrian looked at the paper in front of him, at Selene's careful handwriting outlining a vision for something that could help hundreds of families like his, maybe thousands. Why me? He asked quietly. Because you're good at caring about people. Because you understand what these families need in a way I never could. Because I trust you. Selene's voice dropped. And because I'm tired of pretending the last 5 months have been just about Mia's medical care when we both know it became something else entirely. There it was. The thing they'd been dancing around since that first Saturday lunch. Maybe even since the hospital hallway when Selene had admitted she was lonely. What are you saying? Adrian asked, even though he thought he knew. I'm saying I haven't felt this alive in 20 years. I'm saying Mia draws me pictures and you text me about your day, and sometimes I sit in board meetings thinking about what I'm going to cook for dinner at your apartment on Saturday. I'm saying I've built my entire adult life around not needing anyone, and then you and your daughter showed up and wrecked all of that completely. Guess, but si shiki di it. She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. I'm saying I'm in love with you, Adrian Hayes, both of you. And I want to build something real with you instead of just visiting it on weekends. But only if that's what you want too. Adrian's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it. Adrian's heart was, you're in love with me. Apparently, I'm as surprised as you are. You're in love with me and you're leaving your company and starting a foundation and asking me to run it with you. Us beepots. When you say it like that, it sounds slightly unhinged. It is slightly unhinged. Adrian laughed, the sound coming out shaky. Selene, 5 months ago, you were the ice queen. You terrified me. And now you're sitting in my kitchen at 7 in the morning telling me you're in love with me. Is that a problem? No, I just... He stopped, trying to organize his thoughts. I've been afraid to let myself feel anything because you're my boss and you've done so much for us, and I didn't want to be the pathetic employee who mistook kindness for something else. It wasn't kindness, or it started as kindness and became something I didn't plan for. Selene finally closed the distance, her hand covering his. I don't expect you to feel the same way. You're still grieving your wife, you're focused on Mia, and this is probably terrible timing. I'm in love with you too, Adrian interrupted. Selene went completely still. What? I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you since probably that second Saturday when you sat on my couch playing board games with Mia and laughing at her terrible jokes. I've been texting you every day and looking forward to Saturdays more than anything else in my week and lying awake. At night, thinking about how I'm going to go back to work and maintain professional distance when all I want is this. He gestured between them at their hands on his kitchen table, at the morning light coming through his window, at the life they'd been building in pieces without quite admitting what they were doing. I love my wife, Adrian continued, his voice rough. And losing her almost destroyed me. But she's been gone for 4 years, and I've been so focused on survival and taking care of Mia that I forgot I was allowed to want something for myself. Then you showed up and reminded me what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. Selene's eyes were suspiciously bright. Selene's eyes were, so when I ask if you want to run this foundation with me, you're saying, I'm saying yes. To the foundation, to building something that matters, to all of it. Adrian stood up, pulling her with him. I'm saying I want Saturday dinners every night. I'm saying Mia already considers you family, and I think she might be smarter than both of us. I'm saying I'm terrified because I barely survived losing someone once. And I don't know if I could do it again, but I'm more terrified of not trying. They were standing very close now, close enough that Adrian could see the exact moment Selene's careful control finally shattered completely. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and then she was kissing him. It wasn't smooth or practiced or anything like the romance novels suggested first kisses should be. It was desperate and messy and tasted like coffee and felt like coming home after being lost for years. Adrian's hands found her waist and hers tangled in his hair, and they kissed like people who'd been drowning separately and finally found air. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Selene rested her forehead against his. I haven't done this in a very long time, she admitted. Me neither. We'll figure it out. That seems to be our approach to everything. It's worked so far. Selene laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Adrian had ever heard. A door opened down the hallway. Small footsteps padded toward the kitchen. Adrian and Selene stepped apart just as Mia appeared in the doorway, Dr. Honeybee dragging from one hand, her hair a disaster. Miss Selene. Mia's face lit up. You're here early. I had something important to discuss with your father. Mia looked between them with knowing eyes, far too wise for a 6-year-old. Did you tell him you love us yet? Selene's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Adrian started laughing. How did you... Selene managed. You look at each other all the time when you think I'm not watching, and you smile different now than when you first met us. And Daddy's been less sad. Mia climbed into a chair, completely matter-of-fact. So did you tell him? Or do I have to keep pretending I don't notice? I told him, Selene said, still looking slightly stunned. Good. Can we have pancakes? Just like that, the moment of dramatic revelation shifted into normal Saturday morning chaos. Adrian made pancakes while Mia chattered about school and Selene tried to help, but was clearly useless in the kitchen. They ate together at the small table, syrup getting everywhere, conversation flowing easy and comfortable. This was what the last 5 months had built, Adrian realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but this. Saturday morning pancakes and a 6-year-old who'd claimed Selene as family, and 2 adults who'd found each other when they both needed saving. After breakfast, while Mia was getting dressed, Selene pulled Adrian aside. "I should probably clarify something," she said, "about us. I don't want to rush anything or disrupt Mia's life or make you feel pressured, but Selene, stop overthinking. I built a billion-dollar company by overthinking everything. And look how lonely that made you." Adrian took her hands. "We'll figure this out the same way we've figured out everything else. One day at a time. No pressure, no timelines, just seeing where this goes." "What if I'm terrible at this?" "At relationships and being part of a family and all the normal things people do?" "Then you'll be terrible at it, and we'll love you anyway. That's kind of how family works." Selene's eyes went bright again. "Family? Yeah, if that's okay with you." She kissed him again, softer this time, like she was testing whether this was real or if she'd wake up back in her empty penthouse alone. The foundation launched officially in May. Adrian gave notice at Vaughn Capital, and during 2 weeks of pointed looks and whispered speculation before his last day finally arrived, he didn't care what people thought anymore. He was done apologizing for being helped when he needed it, done feeling ashamed for accepting something good that life had unexpectedly offered. The James Hayes Foundation started small. 1 office in downtown Boston, a small staff, a handful of families they were helping navigate medical crises. But word spread fast. By July, they had a waiting list. By September, they were opening a second location. Adrian discovered he was good at this work in ways he'd never been good at financial analysis. He understood the desperation these parents felt, knew how to talk them through their fear, could navigate hospital bureaucracy and insurance nightmares because he'd lived it. Every family he helped felt like honoring what Selene had done for Mia, paying forward a kindness he could never fully repay. Selene threw herself into fundraising with the same intensity she'd brought to building Vaughn Capital, except now there was joy in it. She hosted charity galas and courted donors and leveraged every connection she'd made in 20 years of business. But she also came home every night, first to Adrian's apartment, then eventually to a house they bought together in Cambridge with a yard where Mia could play. Home. That was the word that kept surprising Adrian. Selene Vaughn, who'd spent 20 years alone in a penthouse, now came home to dinner conversation and Mia's homework spread across the kitchen table and the beautiful mundane chaos of family life. They didn't get it right all the time. Selene sometimes slipped back into Ice Queen mode when she was stressed, shutting down emotionally until Adrian or Mia coaxed her back out. Adrian sometimes spiraled into anxiety about Mia's health, checking on her obsessively until Selene reminded him that fear couldn't protect anyone. They argued about money and boundaries and how much to let Mia get away with. But they figured it out. That was the thing about building something real. It wasn't smooth or perfect or anything like the fantasy. It was messy and complicated and required constant work, but it was worth it. One Saturday in late October, almost exactly a year after Mia's collapse had changed everything, they were at the harbor watching Mia run ahead chasing seagulls. The surgery scar on her chest had faded to a thin white line, barely visible. She was completely healthy now, full of energy, living the normal childhood she deserved. "I've been thinking," Selene said, her hand finding Adrian's. "Dangerous." She elbowed him lightly. "I've been thinking about what you said that first morning, about being terrified of losing someone again." Adrian's chest tightened. "Selene, I'm terrified too. Every single day. I lost James, and it broke something in me I thought could never be fixed. And then I found you and Mia, and I'm so happy it scares me, because happy things can be taken away." She stopped walking, turning to face him. "But I realized something. Being afraid of loss and choosing not to love because of that fear, that's just another way of losing. That's letting grief win twice." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. Adrian's heart stopped. "I'm not good at this," Selene continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't know all the right words or how to do grand romantic gestures, but I know I want to wake up next to you every morning for whatever time we have. I know I want to be there when Mia graduates high school and starts college and does all the amazing things she's going to do. I know I want to build a life with you that's real and messy and sometimes terrifying, but always worth it." She opened the box. Inside were 2 rings, one obviously for Adrian, the other smaller. I know you probably want to be the one proposing because of traditional gender roles or whatever, Selene said, talking faster now, nervous in a way Adrian had never heard. But I spent 20 years following other people's rules, and I'm done with that. So I'm asking, Adrian Hayes, will you marry me? Sus. Adrian looked at this brilliant, complicated, formerly terrifying woman who'd driven through a blizzard for a stranger's daughter and ended up saving both of them. Who'd dismantled her entire carefully constructed life because she'd finally found something worth living for. Who was standing here shaking slightly, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with courage. Yes, he said. Obviously, yes. Selene's face transformed, walls crashing down completely, leaving only joy. She kissed him right there on the harbor walk while Mia squealed and ran back to them. Are you getting married? Mia demanded. Yes, but, Selene said, laughing and crying at the same time. Finally! I've been waiting forever. Mia threw her arms around both of them. Can I be in the wedding? You can be whatever you want, Adrian said, pulling both his girls close. They stood there on the harbor while autumn wind blew around them, and the city hummed with late afternoon energy. Just 3 people who'd found each other when they all needed saving most, choosing to be a family, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Later, people would ask Adrian how he'd ended up married to Selene Vaughn, and he'd struggle to explain it in a way that made sense. The story sounded impossible. The Ice Queen falls for a broke single father and gives up everything to start a foundation and build a life. It sounded like fiction, but the truth was simpler and more complicated than any story. The truth was that sometimes people find each other in their darkest moments and choose to walk toward the light together. Sometimes kindness turns into love, and love turns into family, and family becomes the thing that makes survival worthwhile. The truth was that Selene had been right that first morning in his kitchen. Being afraid of loss and refusing to love because of it was just another kind of losing. Real courage was loving anyway, knowing it might hurt, choosing connection over safety. The wedding was small, held at the hospital where Mia had been treated, in the garden they'd created with foundation funds. Dr. Reeves officiated because she'd been there for the beginning of this whole impossible story. Mia was flower girl and ring bearer and gave a speech that made everyone cry about how families don't have to look like everyone else's to be real. Adrian stood at the altar watching Selene walk toward him and thought about that terrifying November morning when his world had been falling apart. If someone had told him then that the cold billionaire CEO would become his wife, would give up her company to build something meaningful with him, would love his daughter like her own, he'd never have believed it. But that was the thing about real life. It wasn't predictable or neat or anything like the stories promised. It was messy and surprising, and sometimes the person who seemed least likely to save you ended up being exactly what you needed. You know what I learned? Adrian said to Selene that night, after the wedding, after Mia was asleep in her new room in their new house. What's that? Jesse cheat. That the people who've been broken the worst sometimes know best how to help others heal. You lost your brother, and it devastated you. But it also taught you exactly what Mia and I needed when we were falling apart. Terry? Selene was quiet for a moment. I used to think James's death was meaningless. Just random tragedy that destroyed my family for no reason. But starting the foundation, helping all those other children, it doesn't make his death okay. Nothing could do that. But it makes it mean something. Like maybe all that pain taught me something worth passing on. You think he'd be proud of what you built? I think he'd be proud that I finally stopped hiding, that I let myself care about people again, even though it's terrifying. She curled closer to Adrian. I think he'd really like Mia. They would have gotten along. She would have loved having an uncle who was brave like her. They lay there in comfortable silence, and Adrian thought about all the broken pieces that had somehow come together to make this. His wife's death had devastated him, but it had also taught him how precious life was, how important it was to hold tight to the people you loved. Mia's illness had terrified him, but it had brought Selene into their lives. Selene's grief over James had isolated her for 20 years, but it had also prepared her to recognize what they needed and give it without hesitation. None of it was okay. Loss never was. But maybe the point wasn't that pain made you stronger or taught you lessons or happened for a reason. Maybe the point was just that you survived it, and then you chose what to do with that survival. You could hide like Selene had done for 20 years, building walls and pretending safety was the same as living. Or you could break open, let people in, risk getting hurt again because connection mattered more than protection. "Thank you," Adrian said quietly. "For what?" "For following me out of that conference room, for driving me to the hospital, for every single choice you made after that first one. You don't need to thank me for falling in love with you. Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway." Selene kissed him, and they stayed there wrapped around each other until sleep found them both. The foundation thrived. Within 3 years, they had locations in 6 cities, helping hundreds of families navigate medical crises that would have crushed them otherwise. Every success felt personal. Every family they helped a small redemption for all the pain that had brought Adrian and Selene together. Mia grew up healthy and strong, her heart functioning perfectly, the fragile child of 7 becoming a vibrant teenager who wanted to be a doctor so she could help other kids like herself. She never forgot how scared she'd been, but she also never let that fear define her. And Adrian and Selene built a life that neither of them had imagined possible. Not perfect. They still fought about money and boundaries and whose turn it was to handle difficult donors. But real. Messy and complicated and sometimes exhausting, but always worth it. Sometimes Adrian would catch Selene looking at Mia with an expression of such fierce protectiveness it made his heart ache, and he'd remember the lonely woman who'd followed him into a blizzard because she couldn't stand to watch another child suffer. Sometimes Selene would wake from nightmares about James or Mia or both, and Adrian would hold her until the fear passed, reminding her that love was worth the risk of loss. They learned together that healing wasn't linear or clean or something you achieved once and kept forever. It was daily work, choosing over and over to stay open even when it hurt, to trust even when it scared you, to love even knowing it might end. Years later, when people asked Adrian what he'd learned from almost losing everything, he'd think about that November morning when his world fell apart and rebuilt itself into something better. He'd think about Selene choosing vulnerability over safety, about Mia's fearless insistence on claiming Selene as family, about all the ways broken people could help each other heal. "I learned that the worst moments of your life can become doorways to the best ones," he'd say. "Not because pain has purpose, but because how you respond to pain defines who you become. I learned that accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. I learned that families aren't just the people you're born to. They're the people who choose to stay when things get hard." But mostly, he'd learned that love, real love, the messy, complicated kind, was always worth the risk, always worth choosing connection over safety, vulnerability over control, messiness over perfection. Because at the end of the day, the things that matter most aren't the ones you can control or predict or protect yourself from losing. They're the wild, terrifying, beautiful things you choose anyway, knowing they might break your heart, but trusting that some things are worth breaking for. That November morning, when everything fell apart, had taught Adrian Hayes something essential about being human. We're all fragile. We're all one emergency away from devastation. We're all carrying grief and fear and uncertainty about tomorrow. But we're also capable of extraordinary kindness, of seeing someone drowning and choosing to help even when it costs us something, of building families from broken pieces and calling it home, of loving so fiercely that loss becomes bearable because the love itself was real. Standing on the harbor that warm spring evening, watching Mia run between him and Selene, their hands linked together, Adrian understood that this was what survival looked like when you did it right. Not perfect, not painless, but together, choosing each other every day, building something real from the wreckage of everything that had tried to destroy them. 3 lives that had almost ended separately, saved by the simple choice to reach for each other in the dark and refuse to let go. That was the real story. Not about a billionaire or a crisis or dramatic rescue. Just about 3 people who learned that family means showing up, especially when it's hard. That love means risking everything, knowing you might lose it all. That healing means letting people see your broken places and trusting them not to run. And that sometimes, when everything falls apart, the people who help you put it back together become the most important thing you'll ever build.